Hello and welcome to Studio Made. I'm Maurice Carmelli, and in this video I'll be talking about all of the whites artists use today and in the past and comparing them to two whites currently available in pigment form only. I'll show how to turn these new pigments into paint and compare them to the white paints currently in use today. Let's dive in. But before I show how to create calcium white and zirconium white paint, the two new pigments which are the subject of this video, let's examine the different whites found on artist palettes both today and historically. The first white we'll talk about is lead white, and then we'll come up to whites that are more recent. But for lead white, we really have to go back in time.
Lead white was known to the Romans and the Greeks before them. We know that Roman women used lead white as a cosmetic, and they must have seen the lead forming on the pipes that carried the water. That's actually where we get the name plumbing from. Plumbum is lead in Latin. Now, the Sacrofresco murals in Pompeii probably use calcite as a white, but natural lead white known as ceruse was used extensively in other types of artistic painting at the time. In the late medieval and early Renaissance periods, lead white was the main white pigment for egg tempera, or colors bound in egg yolk, or when bound in egg white called glaire or clair coal, distemper, colors bound in animal glue, oil and gum tempera, and gouache, which is a type of opaque watercolor, typically with a small amount of white in it. Possibly the name gouache comes from aguazzo, which means a muddy pool. Now, tempera grounds were made from animal glue and chalk or powdered marble, often slaked into this beautiful white reflective surface that created very high-key paintings. And that's what you see here. During the Renaissance, oil painting became popular and lead white remained the main white pigment. Initially, gesso was used as the ground, but lead white eventually replaced it as a primer. Possibly the first use of lead white as a primer on panel was the Mona Lisa. In the High Renaissance and Baroque eras, artists fully embraced the unique qualities of lead white and started to understand its unique properties, and you could see the paint, at least in the high planes, the light areas, get thicker and thicker and more impasto being applied.
Now, at the time of late medieval, early Renaissance, where artists are still working in egg tempera or transitioning into the oil temperas or underpainting in egg tempera, their paintings are quite bright. They're often painted on these gessoed backgrounds that were panels that were gesso meaning plaster in Italian, and it's typically a mix of a hide glue or casein, which is a milk protein, and powdered chalk or powdered marble. Oftentimes, the powdered chalk or marble was plaster that had been slaked. I've been making this since my youth. This is slaked dental plaster in this case. It's really fine, and as you can see, it's very bright and reflective. This can be crushed and mixed with animal glue, or I've even mixed it with acrylic primers to make an acrylic gesso. It's a nice additive into paints, very useful, and it creates these beautiful reflective backgrounds, which is kind of, to me, a hallmark of this period where the paintings are fairly high key. At one point, artists started to work in oils and were still using this as a background. Rubens would use this as a background, and then since it's absorbent, put a thin coat of an imprimatur and paint into it. A lot of his studies are done that way. They found some of the early Rembrandts that are on panels have this as a primer and then a thin coat of lead on top of it, which is very interesting to me. That's how he would have sealed it. I would have never thought of that. I would have thought the imprimatur first. Putting the lead over it makes good sense. I've done many paintings for myself on this gessoed surface, beautiful surface to work on. This is aluminum composite material that I put the gesso on, a self-portrait I did years ago. It's really nice to work on. It's kind of velvety. Now, this is somewhat related to the white that fresco painters started to use at this time called Bianco San Giovanni or St. John's white. Kind of a similar process, but not really, but they are related, and it's also reflective. And you can see up until the Mannerist era, even the frescoes are highly reflective. In the Mannerist era, some of them started to tone the intonaco, the final layer, and deepen it to match what was happening in oil painting, which oil painting, oils itself absorbs light. Even lead white absorbs light more than this does. So the paintings started to become more realistic and more representative of what's happening in interior lighting. And you can see that transition partly to do with the whites and the primers.
Lead white remained the primary white pigment until titanium white appeared, even after the introduction of zinc white, which was introduced in the early 19th century and adopted by many artists, especially those using watercolor and gouache, simply, I believe, because it was first introduced as a watercolor gouache as Chinese white. And the Tate galleries found that the pre-Raphaelites did use lead white, but they also had zinc white on their palette. Now, lithopone appeared later in the 1800s, but it had a weird photoreactive effect where it darkened in sunlight. But once they fixed that, it was mostly used industrially. Lead and zinc whites were in common use until the early 20th century, and titanium eventually became popular by the 1920s. Now, Salvador Dali, interestingly, if you read any of his books, says that zinc white's really the only good white. And that I learned recently that Thomas Hart Benton was probably one of the earliest artists to put titanium white on his palette.
Now I'm going to start making paint, and I'm going to show the full process, but I'm going to speed it up quite a bit in editing. But if you want to see the full process, mostly uncut without any narration, I'm going to extract a separate video for that and show the whole process. It's usually about 40 minutes to about an hour, a little more than an hour, to make 2 or 3 tubes, 40 or 50 mils thick of paint. Every color differs. Some go faster, some go slower. Now, some of you might be wondering, do I make all my paints? No, I only do this about 2 or 3 times a year at most, sometimes just twice a year. And sometimes I'm just taking paints that I purchased from manufacturers I like and blending them here to make grays. So this setup is useful for a lot of things. Having empty tubes is useful. There's a lot of colors I use over again that I don't like to mix, especially when I'm doing studies in grisaille or when I'm doing flesh. I like to have a basic flesh tone and some of the darks pre-mix. For landscape, there's a whole range of grays that are nice to pre-mix. And there are a lot of colors that you just can't buy. They're available in pigment form. They're quite beautiful. It doesn't make sense for manufacturers to make them for one reason or another. So I buy the pigments and I make them myself. I'm also able to customize certain paints. I have warm whites that there isn't a warm white available that I really like, so I make my own. And that I'm going to do today. I'm not going to film it, but with leftover white, I will then add other things to it and make a warm white. And I kind of like chromium oxide green, but not as it comes. So I often modify that as well, actually hand grinding certain colors to add into some store-bought chromium oxide green. So this is a good and useful process. Don't discount it right away as it's too much trouble. Remember, artists of the past, up until maybe the mid 19th century, were making colors by themselves. Sometimes apprentices did it, sometimes they did it themselves, and we still have their paintings and they're still in wonderful shape. We're talking, artists from Giovanni Bellini up until, I believe the pre-Raphaelites were buying their paint, but slightly before that, so 19th century, that's quite a big era where people were making their own paint. So I'm going to basically turn the sound down and start mowing the paint. You'll see it quite fast. After that, we'll follow the zirconium. I'll also have that quite fast. And then I'll pull up all the drawdowns and all the charts that I did to compare these two whites with the whites that artists currently use, so you can judge for yourself if it's worth making.
On the clock, second hand, that make the whole round. Why you still stand on the minute hand? Push away, 'cause I feel too close, feel too close, feel too close. Used to put love on the scale, hope for the other side.
Okay, so here's the first comparison chart between all the different whites that I tested. Starting on the left, lead, then titanium, lithopone, calcium, and zirconium. Calcium white and zirconium white I handmade just for this video. So as you could see, the titanium is the most opaque, the straight titanium, and the lead, lithopone, and zirconium white are fairly translucent. Actually, the zirconium white is not fully white. It's very translucent. I found it to be a beautiful white or whitish, near white paint for making flesh tones, as you'll see later. The calcium white that I make is somewhere between titanium and lead white. Lithopone actually on paper and here on the sample chart looks quite nice. I just personally don't like it because it's a slow dryer and makes very soft films. Okay, this is the second chart I did with the same whites, as you can see, sped up, but real time, where I'm mixing pyro red with the different whites, making a gradation from right to left. And you can clearly see the difference in the opacity and the temperature of each whites. Lead white's warm, titanium is cooler. Lithopone is warmer than titanium white, cooler than lead white. The calcium white leans towards titanium white, but it's far more translucent. And the zirconium is not really white, but it does work as a tint, and it's very translucent. So lead white is a very good white in that it requires very little oil to bind into paint. It partially saponifies, means it's flexible, and it's a bulk dryer. It dries from inside out and outside in, but it has toxicity and it does become more translucent with time. Titanium white does not become more translucent with time, but forms kind of weak films. It's kind of brittle. It's very cool, and you can produce chalky mixtures if you're not careful, but it is a nice clean white. Lithopone on paper looks really good, like I said before. It checks all the right boxes, but it produces soft films and it's a slow dryer. But as you can see, it produces nice tints. It doesn't overpower pyro red. Calcium white for me is my favorite white right now, and I am going to add zirconium on there. You can make it weaker if you don't put titanium in it. I have a little bit of regular titanium mixed into it, so it does lean a little closer to regular titanium, but it's not nearly as strong as opaque as regular titanium, and it's a little warmer. Now zirconium is a beautiful white or near white for mixing flesh colors and dark tints, and I hopefully that you can see here on screen there's quite a difference between these different whites. And finally, here's a color chart I did of zirconium white for my blog, and on the far right you can see the flesh tones I made with zirconium. Quite easy to do. It's a quite wonderful addition to my palette, specifically for doing flesh tones.
Well, thanks for visiting with me today, and I hope I piqued your interest enough that you'll go out and purchase these pigments and try making the paint yourself. I think you'll be very pleased. And if you feel I left something out, if you want to add something, if you have a question, please leave a comment. I'll do my best to respond. And while you're at it, like, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you again soon on Studio Made.